Humans, and welcome to Read to Me, Matt Dunn. I'm Matt Dunn, and I'm going to read to you. We're reading The Color Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft. We are on part 8. Ooh. Some things have started to get weird. Very weird. Let's do this. There was no wind. Get it? Got it. Good. Even the day tips of the lingering hedge mustard, gray and blighted, and the fringe on the roof of the standing Democrat wagon was unstirred. And yet, amid that tense, godless calm, the high, bare boughs of all the trees in the yard were moving. They were twitching morbidly. And spasmodically, clawing in convulsive and epileptic madness at the moonlit clouds, scratching impotently in the noxious air as if jerked by some alien and bodiless line of linkage with subterrene horrors withering and struggling below the black roots. These trees were just like fucking moving, I guess, and had a life of their own. Not a man breathed for several seconds. Then a cloud of darker depth passed over the moon, and the silhouette of clutching branches faded out momentarily. At this there was a general cry, muffled with awe, but husky and almost identical from every throat. For the terror had not faded with the silhouette, and in a fearsome instant of deeper darkness the watchers saw wiggling at the treetop height 1,000 tiny points of faint and unhallowed radiance, tipping each bow like the fire of St. Elmo or the flames that came down on the apostle's head at Pentecost. It was a monstrous constellation of unnatural light, like a gluted swarm of corpse-fed fireflies dancing hellish sarabands over an accursed marsh, and its color was that same nameless intrusion which Amy had come to recognize and dread. All the while, the shaft of the phosphorescence from the well was getting brighter and brighter, bringing to the minds of the huddled men a sense of doom, and abnormality which far outraced any image that conscious minds could form. It was no longer shining out, it was pouring out. And as the shapeless stream of unplaceable color left the well, it seemed to flow directly into the sky. The veterinary shivered and walked to the front door to drop the heavy extra bar across it. Amy shook no less and had to tug and point for lack of controllable voice when he wished to draw notice to the growing luminosity of the trees. The neighing and stamping of the horses had become utterly frightful, but not a soul of that group in the old house would have ventured forth for any earthly reward. With the moments the shining of the trees increased, while the ruthless branches seemed to strain more and more toward verticality. I guess they're just vertical. The wood of the well sweep was shining now, and presently a policeman dumbly pointed to some wooden sheds and beehives near the stone wall in the west. And presently, a policeman dumbly pointed to some wooden sheds and beehives near the stone wall on the west. They were commencing to shine too, though the tethered vehicles of the visitors seemed so far unaffected. Then there was a wild commotion and clopping in the roads, and as Emmy quenched the lamp for better seeing, they realized that the span of frantic grays had broke their sapling and run off with the Democrat wagon. Their horses are gone. The shock served to loosen several tongues, and embarrassed whispers were exchanged. "It spreads on everything organic that's been around here," muttered the medical examiner. No one replied, but the man who had been in the well gave a hint that his long pole must have stirred up something intangible. "It was awful," he added. "There was no bottom at all. Just ooze and bubbles and the feeling of something lurking under there." Emmy's horse still pawed and screamed deafeningly in the road outside, and nearly drowned its owner's faint quaver as he mumbled his formless reflection. It come from that stone. It growed down there, and it got everything living. It fed itself on 'em, mind and body. Thad and Murney, Zenas and Nabby and Nene was the last, and they all drunk the water. It got strong on 'em. It come from beyond, where things aren't like they be here. Now it's gone home. So he says it's leaving. At this point, as the column of unknown color flared suddenly stronger and began to weave itself into fantastic suggestion of shape, which each spectator later described differently, there came from a poor tethered hero such a sound as no man before or since ever heard from a horse. Every person in that low-pitched sitting room stopped his ears, and Amy turned away from the window in horror and nausea. Words could not convey it. When Amy looked out again, the hapless beast lay huddled, inert in the moonlit ground between the splintered shafts of the buggy. That was the last of Hero till they buried him the next day. But the present was no time to mourn. For almost at this instant, a detective silently called attention to something terrible in the very room with them. In the absence of the lamplight, it was clear that a faint phosphorescence had begun to pervade the entire apartment. It glowed on the broad planked floor and the fragment of the rag carpet, and shimmered over the sashes of the small paned windows. It ran up and down the exposed corner posts, coruscated about the shelf and mantel, and infected the very doors and furniture. Each minute saw it strengthen, and at last it was very plain that healthy living things must leave that house. Get the fuck out. Amy shooed them the back door and the path up through the fields to the 10-acre pasture. They walked and stumbled as in a dream, and did not dare look back till they were far away on the high ground. They were glad of the path, for they could not have gone the front way by the well. It was bad enough passing the glowing barn and shed and those shining orchard trees with the gnarled and fiendish contours, but thank heaven the branches did their worst twisting high up. The moon went under some very black clouds as they crossed the rustic bridge over Chapman's Brook, and it was blind groping from there to the open meadows. They got to get the fuck out of here. It's gonna get weird in here. When they looked back toward the valley and the distant gardener place, at the bottom they saw a fearsome sight. All the farm was shining with the hideous unknown blend of color, trees, buildings, and even such grass and herbage as had not been wholly changed to lethal gray brittleness. The boughs were all straining skyward, tipped with tongues of foul flame and lambent tricklings of the same. The same monstrous fire were creeping about the ridge poles of the house, barn, and sheds. It was a scene from a vision of Fuseli, and all the rest reigned that riot of the luminous amorphousness, that alien and undimensioned rainbow of cryptic poison from the well, seething, feeling, lapping, reaching, scintillating, straining, and malignly bubbling in its cosmic and unrecognizable chromaticism. Then, without warning, the hideous thing shot vertically up toward the sky like a rocket or a meteor, leaving behind no trail and disappearing through a round and curiously regular hole in the clouds before any man could grasp or cry out. No watcher can ever forget that sight, and Amy stared blankly at the stars of Cygnus Deneb twinkling above the others where the unknown color had melted into the Milky Way. But his gaze was the next moment called swiftly to earth by the crackling in the valley. It was just that. Only a wooden ripping and crackling, and not an explosion, as so many others of the party vowed. Yet the outcome was the same, for in one feverish, kaleidoscopic instant there burst up from that doomed and accursed farm a gleamingly eruptive cataclysm of unnatural sparks and substance, blurring the glance of the few who saw it and sending forth to the zenith a bombarding cloudburst of such colored and fantastic fragments as our universe must needs disown. Through quickly reclosing vapors they followed the great morbidity that had vanished, and in another second they had vanished too. Behind and below was only a darkness to which the men dared not return, and all about was a mounting wind which seemed to sweep down in black frore gusts from interstellar space. It shrieked and howled and lashed the fields and distorted woods and in a mad cosmic frenzy, till soon the trembling party realized it would be no use waiting for the moon to shew what was left down there at Nene's. I think the word shew, S-H-E-S-H-E-W, is a form of show, because I definitely am getting a showing vibe when they say shoe. To show what was left down at Nene's. Makes sense. Too odd even to hint theories, the 7 shaking men trudged back toward Arkham by the North Road. Amy was worse than his fellows and begged them to see him inside his own kitchen, instead of keeping straight on to town. He did not wish to cross the nighted, wind-whipped roads alone to his home on the main road, for he had an added shock that the others were spared, and was crushed forever with a brooding fear he dared not even mention for many years to come, as the rest of the watchers on the tempestuous hill had stolidly set their faces toward the road. Amy had looked back an instant at the shadowed valley of desolation, so lately sheltering his ill-starred friend. And from that stricken, faraway spot, he had seen something feebly rise, only to sink down again upon the place from which the great shapeless horror had shot into the sky. It was just a color, but not any color of our earth or heavens. And because Amy recognized that color and knew that the last faint remnant must still lurk down there in the well, he has never been quite right since. Amy would never go near the place again. It is over half a century now since the horror happened, but he has never been there, and will be glad when the new reservoir blots it out. I shall be glad too, for I do not like the way the sunlight changed color around the mouth of that abandoned well I passed. I hope the water will always be very deep. I hope the water will always be very deep, but even so I shall never drink it. I do not think I shall visit the Arkham country hereafter. 3 of the men who had been with Amy returned the next morning to see the ruins by daylight. But there were not any real ruins, only the bricks of the chimney, the stones of the cellar, some mineral and metallic litter here and there, and the rim of that nefandous. Well, save for Amy's dead horse, which they towed away and buried, and the buggy which they shortly returned to him, everything that had ever been living had gone. 5 eldritch acres of dusty gray desert remained, nor had anything ever grown there since. To this day it sprawls open to the sky like a great spot eaten by acid in the woods and fields, and the few who had ever dared glimpse in spite of the rural tales have named it the Blasted Heath. The Blasted Heath. The rural tales are queer. They might be even queerer if city men and college chemists could be interested enough to analyze the water from that disused well, or the gray dust no wind seemed ever to disperse. Botanists, too, ought to study the stunted flora on the borders of that spot, for they might shed light on the country notion that the blight is spreading. Little by little, perhaps an inch a year. People say the color of the neighboring herbage is not quite right in the spring, and that wild things leave queer prints in the light winter snow. Snow never seemed quite so heavy in the Blasted Heath as it is elsewhere. Horses, the few that are left in this motor age, grow skittish in the Silent Valley, and hunters cannot depend on their dogs too near the splotch of grayish dust. They say the mental influences are very bad too. Numbers went queer in the year after Nene's taking, and always they lacked the power to get away. Then the stronger-minded folk all left the region, and only the foreigners tried to live in the crumbling old homesteads. They could not stay, though, and one sometimes wonders what insight beyond ours, their wild, weird stories. Oh my God, is getting me. It is getting me. Wabadaba. Then they could not say, though. And one sometimes wonders what insight beyond ours their wild, weird stores of whispered magic have given them. Their dreams at night, they protest, are very horrible in that grotesque country, and surely the very look of the dark realm is enough to stir a morbid fancy. No traveler has ever escaped a sense of strangeness in those deep ravines, and artists shiver as they paint thick woods whose mystery is as much of the spirit as of the eye. I myself am curious about the sensation I derived from my one lone walk before Amy told me his tale. When twilight came, I had vaguely wished some clouds would gather, for an odd timidity about the deep skyey voids above had crept into my soul. Do not ask me for my opinion, I do not know. That is all. There was no one but Amy to question, for Arkham people will not talk about the strange days. And all three professors who saw the aerolite and its colored globule are dead. Dead. Dead, I say. Blah, 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 blah. There were other globules. Depend on that. There were other globules. Depend on that. One must have fed itself and escaped. And probably there were another which was too late. No doubt it is still down the well. I know there was something wrong with the sunlight I saw above the minismal brink. The rustics say the blight creeps in an inch a year, so perhaps there is a kind of growth or nourishment even now. But whatever demon hatchling is there, it must be tethered to something or else it would quickly spread. Is it fastened to the roots of those trees that claw the air? One of the current Arkham tales is about fat oaks that shine and move as they ought not to at night. What is it? Only God knows. In terms of matter, I suppose the thing Amy described would be called a gas. But this gas obeyed laws that are not of our cosmos. This was no fruit of such worlds and suns as shine on the telescopes and photographic plates of our observatories. This was no breath from the skies whose motions and dimensions our astronomers measure or deem too vast to measure. It was just a color out of space, a frightful messenger from unformed realms of infinity beyond all nature as we know it, from realms whose mere existence stuns the brain and numbs us with the black extra-cosmic gulfs it throws open before our frenzied eyes. I doubt very much if Amy consciously lied to me, and I do not think his tale was all a freak of madness, as the townfolk had forewarned. Something terrible came to the hills and valleys on that meteor, and something terrible, though I know not in what proportion, still remains. I shall be glad to see the water come. Meanwhile, I hope nothing will happen to Amy. He saw so much of the thing, and its influence was so insidious. Why has he never been able to move away? How clearly he recalled those dying words of Nene's. Can't get away, draws ya. You know some'at's comin', but 'tain't no use. Amy is such a good old man. When the reservoir gang gets to work, I must write the chief engineer to keep a sharp watch on him. I would hate to think of him as the gray, twisted, brittle monstrosity which persists more and more in troubling my sleep. Yeah, that's so crazy. So, the color out of space. Pretty crazy. So, I mean, that is possible. I think that's a very likely story. You never know when a meteor is going to hit, and on that meteor is some sort of unworldly element, you know. But anyway, if you want me to read more, please check out some more of my videos. Like, subscribe, and write your comments down below. Thank you.